Thanks so much for coming out tonight. It's really nice to see so many people here. I've never organised an event at BRAKC which has been so popular, so I'm really pleased. BRAKC, I should say, stands for Birkbeck Research and Aesthetics of Kinship and Community. So it's a research centre that I run here at Birkbeck with a number of colleagues, some of whom are here. And we are a group of, I guess, academics, artists, students, who are interested in looking at different types of artwork, whether it's film, photography, literature, lots of things, even music, I guess, but anything which interrogates the question of the family or the community or the group in a provocative way. We're interested in the idea of community as a real and viable concept, but one which needs to be questioned, pulled apart, interrogated, and I think that nothing does that better, as far as I'm aware, than the film we're going to watch tonight, which is, as you know, Nighthawks by Peck and Paul Hallam. So I'm incredibly excited to introduce Ron and Paul. It's so kind of them to come and introduce their film. After the film, so basically what Ron and Paul will introduce the film briefly, we'll watch the film, and at the end of the film, we'll have time, hopefully about half an hour or even 40 minutes, for some questions and answers. I guess I'll start it off, but then throw it open very quickly to the audience. But before we do that, Ron and Paul will introduce the film. I would just like to say that this is a film which is incredibly important to me. I only actually saw it for the first time, must have been about 2.5, 3 years ago. I found it quite randomly, and since then it stayed with me in a really remarkable way, in a way that very few cultural artifacts have, in fact. Without wishing to embarrass Ron and Paul, I would say that, maybe James Baldwin, Kafka, that's about it. Anyway, I'll stop there. But there's something extremely haunting. For those of you who haven't seen the film, and I think that we're probably quite a mixed audience. Some of you will have seen the film and know it well. Some of you will never have seen it. But for those of you who have seen the film, I hope you'll agree that it's not just a film which is incredibly important because it captures a moment, which it does, or it's about important things, which it is, or it's filmed in incredibly provocative and interesting ways, which it is, but it's haunting. There's something about it which stays with you, which defies language. So very excited to be able to see it in a collective type of situation. So I'll stop rambling. I'll introduce Paul Hallam.
Carry on.
Although maybe Mansell's asked me if we can, when we do speak, if we can speak sort of over here, and I have not been. So if I haven't been recorded, too bad. But hopefully you will. So if you can, when you're speaking, if you could just stand over here. Paul Hallam, all the way from Istanbul. So very honoured. Ron Peck, all the way from Bethnal Green. But Ron's had a very hard week also for various reasons. So incredibly grateful to both of them. I'm not going to introduce them and talk about their various films, short films, long films, all of which are wonderful. We could perhaps bring some of those into the discussion afterwards, as you like. But I'm just going to give you the floor, as it were.
I don't think either of us want to say a lot before the film, sort of rather that you just see it and react to it. But I thought it was worth just remembering that we made this film 35 years ago. In fact, I was checking our kind of archive on the film, and we were shooting one of the scenes in Regent's Park 35 years ago today, in weather quite as cold as today. And it's just worth remembering, what it was like 35 years ago. I mean, we had something like 3 television, I think we had 3 TV channels, terrestrial channels. There was no digital. We weren't working on computers. We didn't have cell phones. And the next revolution that was just about to come was VHS, which hadn't hit us when we made Nighthawks. And the world we were trying to put onto the screen, the world of the main character and gay characters he met particularly, it was a hidden, by and large hidden world. that at the time we were making the film was changing and growing along with many other things that were changing and growing. It was a period of descent and change, and the film was, in a way, came out of that kind of time. It was made independently, couldn't have been made any other way. It would never have been financed by BBC, or it wasn't financed by BFI, and I think it would be exactly the same today if we were trying to make the same film. And it was very nearly not made at all. It was very, very difficult to make it. I think we kept going, I think at least 3 years, but I think more, like 4 years, of just trying to pull the finance together over a long period of time. And it was really only possible because it was a group of us, and it was a group that got bigger and bigger. And I should just say that two of the group, apart from Paul and I, are here tonight. Richard Taylor, the editor, and Rachel James, who plays the Judy character, the main woman in the film, is here tonight as well. So we were part of a big group, and it was that group that really made the film.
It kind of became like a club in itself. I think the world of the making of the film was almost like an alternative world to the one that's in the film. And a lot of things happened backstage. It was bringing together of a huge number of gay people to work on their own project, where they kind of play characters that draw on things about their own lives, but are actually fictional characters. But I think Ron's probably said enough, and that most, except huge thank you to Andrew for certainly from me for getting me over here. It's great to be back for a few days from Istanbul, and very interesting context to see it. This is you can just look around the audience and see there are people who weren't born when the film was made, and people who were maybe even older than the film, and people who were, I think there may be a couple of other people who might have been in the bar scenes in the audience, but reintroduce yourself to me after. Okay, hope you enjoy.
Yep. Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Paul. Okay, so as I say, there will be a chance for questions and answers after the film, but in the meantime, enjoy the film. Thanks again, everyone, for coming, and thanks for staying, and apologies again for the cold, although some people don't seem to have been as cold as I've been, but I'm freezing. I want to say also, just I forgot to say at the beginning, thanks very much to Andy Godwin and to Daniel Monk for publicising this on their various e-lists, because I think lots of you came from there as well. Anyway, Paul, Ron, can I just start by asking how you felt watching the film tonight?
Well, it's probably about the 100th time I've seen it.
Right.
I think what happens after a while is you're interested more. Well, the funny thing is, I'm sure Paul will agree, you always see something else.
Yeah, especially a few things.
And you change, of course, and the times change. But you become incredibly sensitive to the audience, and especially the audience picking up on little bits of humour that were intentional, and that when the film came out were missed completely. But also, I think, it's great to see so many people. It's amazing in London, because, as I said, it's 35 years old and it's been around for a while. But what's been quite amazing, if I'm not diverging,
Please diverge. Yeah.
is Paul and I have been very not only aware we've been at some of these screenings, but in the last 3 years, the film has had its first screenings in Russia, in Turkey, Czech Republic, Slovakia. 2 years ago it was shown in the open air in Berlin, in a square, public square. It's always, it's still getting a life. It's just, it's like an old lady having a second life. It's kind of strange, really.
Why do you call it a lady?
I don't know. It's
Interesting.
think of something to say. It's But I think what has been disappointing, for example, here, is that apart from a screening which I think was 1980, it has been impossible to get it shown on broadcast television again. Even though when it did show, I mean, it had there was a lot of controversy building up to its Channel 4 transmission, and it was at a time when the tabloids were going for Channel 4 in any way they could, and we actually hit the front page of the Daily Star, I think it was, under the title Channel 4 Shockers.
Channel 4 Shockers with Derek Jarman.
With Derek Jarman, Sebastian, yeah. A tirade against Channel 4 showing films like this. And
but worse
Sebastian.
was the Sun one, which was kids to star in gay film. And where we were staying in Bethnal Green, quite a few of the neighbours kind of got wind of where we were making the film and what was going on. So it was actually quite scary time, because it was very much National Front time.
I mean, there were, before the film was out, I certainly had death threats because of these articles about children being in the film. Nobody knew what the film was, but it was quite frightening.
I wanted to talk about the children perhaps later on, specifically in regard to that very powerful sequence later in the film. But you mentioned different countries, different cultures that this film is gradually being unveiled to. Could you say something about how different types of people, different countries have reacted, different audiences basically have reacted to the film, if there have been discernibly different responses?
Well, the screenings I've been to, and I'm sure Paul, it would be interesting to hear Paul talk about Turkey. For me, the most interesting was the screening 2 years ago in Moscow, which, unfortunately, she's not here tonight, the lady who organised that, also arranged for an interview on Russian television, quite an extensive interview, really good interview, and it was a good audience, very intelligent discussion afterwards. But because of changes in the law in Russia, in the last months, it would now be illegal to show the film in Russia, because it would be seen, rather like the Clause 28 here, as promoting homosexuality, and that got us, at the time the film was completed, the film was banned in Greece for quite a few years.
On the grounds that it would corrupt the morals of Greek youth.
The Greek youth was corrupted a long time ago.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, that was that. I think because Russia was such a complete unknown to me, I was really impressed by how interested people were, the discussion we had afterwards, the sort of more informal chatting afterwards. So to now know that event couldn't happen without me and organisers being prosecuted is very sad, and I hope it will change.
It was interesting in Istanbul, where it had its first screening, because a lot of teachers turned up. A lot of the conversation afterwards was that they felt it was like watching their present-day life, and that very few teachers are out in Turkey, I think, and certainly not in schools, maybe a few in universities. But for me, there's a kind of really odd moment, or sort of ironic kind of thing. I'm not out at Istanbul University yet. I have 1,400 students, and it would be such gossip, and I'd have to become the representative of the whole topic. And I think, oh no, not again, 35 years later. But people found it was really, they just kept saying, but this is so like our lives are. So it's very touching, in fact, this kind of screening there. There are many differences, but they didn't see it as a kind of period film in particular. So that made it a very kind of moving, actually, a kind of moving screening for me.
That was one of the things I was wondering, actually, in relation to the audience tonight, and generally is you know, I made the point that it's 35 years old, and you know, every film is in its place and time, and even things like the technology people are using, like the phones and things, it locks it into time. But I think
and they don't wear pullovers in discos.
I do.
And all the beer.
But anyway.
But you wonder what, because in films one likes oneself, bit of 40s Fritz Lang film or something, you know, something, if a film works for you, it travels through time. And I'm very curious whether this film does that, but and how far it crosses over. I think the film, when it came out originally in '79, and ran for a very long time at the Gate, what was the Gate Cinema, I think nearly 3 months. It broke well beyond a gay. It wasn't for a gay audience. It was an audience in general. A lot of course, gay people went. Most gay people went because I think it was very publicised. But it didn't exclude other people. And in fact, we had an awful lot of letters from women. Women who had curiously identified with the male teacher. That was very interesting. Or it even identified with both the male and the female leads. It was very... Not what I expected, I have to say.
No, but I mean, I can, just from my perspective, I'm the same age as the film. Well, just a year older, I'm 35. But watching it now, I mean, I find it so it speaks to me in so many ways. I mean, about all manner of things, but mostly just, I mean, tonight when I watched it, I just felt, more moved than I've ever been. But just the alienation of the lives, the way in which the characters seem to find it so hard to communicate in an emotional way, to actually make emotional contact, and it feels like, I don't know, I was a baby when it was made, but it feels like the world that we live in today, it seems like it's gone even further in that direction. Just that kind of general sense of dissociation. And
certainly the difficulty of talking and communicating about anything. I think partly because of, again, every sound playback is slightly different, and I was really just aware of the small talk.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know if one was you wouldn't take exactly that subject now, but I think so much of the communication would be through media.
Yeah.
He may not, go to a club at all. It would all be on the computer or the phone.
Yeah. But was that part of the kind of conception of the film when you thought about it? We want to make these points about difficulties in establishing meaningful contact in dialogue, or was that something? I mean, obviously you're making the point about relationships and sexual relationships generally. I get that must have been there from the outset. But in terms of just the way in which the actors are talking to each other, was that part of the project, or was that just...
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And I think it grew... I'm sure Paul had his own comment on it, but we did a lot of work with the people we were working with.
Right.
They were using their own language, but we also were building a script that was something, I think it's 128, 130 pages.
Right.
Which is full of, it's like a conventional script, except that it's not giving the direct speech, it's giving kind of indirect speech, a description of how that dialogue is going to go.
Right.
And we would keep changing that according to how the improvisations went.
Right.
Actually, I mean, Rachel, you were here. It was a bit like that, wasn't it? I mean, Rachel was very involved in these improvisations, but we would just keep trying it many different ways, and we would try to make the script the current state of play until we were actually filming. But then when we were filming, it was going to always be different again, and each take would be slightly different.
And the film did get a lot of people didn't like the film. It got very, very fierce responses from various parts of the gay community, to use that word, tonight's word. And it's, I think, because everybody wanted a separate film. Some people wanted a romantic, happy ending, the two guys at the end walking off into the sunset. some wanted it to be much more about friendships, things outside of the pickups, the one-night stands. Others wanted a more overt politics. Much of the material that wasn't used in the film was used in a second film called Strip Jack Naked, which is also partly Ron's autobiography, available on the DVDs that we have with us.
Excellent. Yes. Yes. They're well worth getting. Yes.
There's a lot of extras on the British Film Institute's DVDs, which kind of go into the whole history of its making and some of the earlier pieces we did before the final film. That maybe will answer quite a lot of the questions that people might have about the film. Actually, so.
Well, the thing is, I mean, the DVD release is so wonderful, isn't it? Because you've got the Strip Jack Naked film, you've got the wonderful booklet, which has so much in it. But still, I mean, so I guess some of my questions will repeat some of.
But that
some
kind
of
of
the material.
melancholia of it, I think, with that comedy as well, is. I feel it more now watching it today than I'd ever done before. I think.
Really.
Yeah. But I never thought of it as being a sad film. It just seemed like that's what people did. You just sort of went out and chance took, these chance encounters, which were often a bit banal and very awkward and sometimes incredibly upsetting. But that happens in all sort of quick relationships. So. Yeah, I don't know why it
I think I
struck
felt.
me more.
I don't know if you agree. For me, the aspect I picked up on most of that was a kind of fragility of these contacts. That I felt an awful lot about inexpressed need or not expressed need, and often people just being slightly out of sync with each other. And I don't know how. In a contemporary version, it would be far more accentuated of people having tougher demands, as it were, because it's much more kind of individualistic culture today than it was then. And, at that time, that was, in one book called The Gay World, it was, it was growing, but it was not huge. And therefore there was something rather concentrated about people meeting in these places. And one thing I miss a bit from, that I don't think we succeeded with enough in the film, there is a bit of it there, was just how incredible varied all these contacts were from every class.
Well, it wasn't so specialist. Basically, everybody went to the same handful of bars and clubs, so you did meet all kinds of people in it, and it wasn't like different type of music every evening, like in a lot of clubs. And,
I mean, it was quite interesting that the film was made possible through private investment, mostly, with one producer, Don Boyd here, and German television. But the other people were private individuals, rich individuals, and I've lost my point completely. Oh yes, that following on Paul's point really about the walking into the sunset at the end, I think to a lot of our investors, the last man who works for the BBC was, oh, why do you want to look anywhere else? You found him. Here's the perfect man, and they really did not want us to end with any doubt about they thought, okay, he's been through these more tangential relationships, so at the end show him going off with him. That's the man for him. And we doubted it.
Yeah, the investor screening, people were like in the classroom, they were like shouting for and against the film.
Wow.
Really, really fierce argument. And it was basically because everybody wanted their own gay film. And in a sense, we have got that now. We've got this whole range of types of film. But at that time, there really was almost nothing. So, so people were a bit upset, and we probably wrongly advertised it as trying to cover the spectrum of London and things. You couldn't do it in one film. And in the end, a lot of it kind of went around the main character. And if things didn't fit with that main character, then they had to go. But in a way, there were lots of other things going on with this community of people getting together. I mean, the film was the coming out moment for many of the people in the film, whose families and friends didn't know. Very brave to be in the film, to be seen in the film, including lots of teachers dancing in the last sequence of it, because it was on Channel 4. Very easy to be spotted. So it became a kind of alternative community making the film. So I think the actual project, I don't really like this word community, but just saying it, it became a sort of an alternative place. You had an excuse to meet people and talk about something else other than what you would in a club. Anybody else was in the film here? I thought maybe one or two people said they were coming who were
Right,
in the final scene. The final scene was meant to be a bit the shape of things to come.
To come, of course, yeah.
I remember having to shout with a megaphone, will some of you please take your shirts off? It was kind of, because you could just see that arriving, that kind of, the mega club arriving.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Rachel, who's here, Rachel James, who played Judy. Could you say something more about, and maybe Rachel would want to say something as well, but could you say something more about that character? I mean, I guess, well, how should I frame this? One could imagine the film, you know, without that character, in a sense. It would be a completely different film. You could have just gone along, made this film about Jim and his encounters, and it'd been quite focused on that. And yet Judy seems to me she's such an important character. She transforms it into a totally different kind of film. Sorry, I'm not being very articulate about that, but I can maybe say more about what I mean. Was she always part of your conception of the film?
Yes, as a character, because I think really once you started going into the material, you couldn't just be you couldn't really just be dealing with gay stuff. You were dealing with sexual roles being up for revision in every kind of way. I mean, it's interesting with the current. Well, next couple of weeks, isn't it? This vote on gay marriage, because at the time of making the film, I mean, the big question was whether marriage made any sense at all for anybody, rather than wanting to be co-opted into marriage or to marry yourself. It was marriage in question for everyone. So I think Rachel's character was, you know, had her own restlessness and questioning, and they kind of reinforce each other a little bit. And yet, with those, you know, because they are seen together by those kids, it is assumed they make assumptions, and it's those assumptions that make his life difficult.
Although, when I was watching it tonight, I felt that there is a real intensity between Jim and Judy, in a sense, which, whilst perhaps not sexual, there's something very real, which is kind of on the border between them. It seems to me, which makes the film, you know, really quite complex.
Do you have a view?
How do you feel?
Well, I was going to say that my understanding was that what we were dealing with was at the time it appeared that society was in flux. I mean, there was David Cooper and the death of the family, and Lang and all those people, and certainly some women were exploring alternative lifestyles, and there was very much up the idea of some women rejecting the old-fashioned notion of the man as the head of the house and organising the family. But I think that word restlessness is very good, because I think that does reflect really what was happening for Judy. That she was restless. But a lot of people were restless. You know?
Yeah.
It was like Germaine Greer had written her book. But I must say that tonight I found that scene where I expect we'd all like to go back and do it a bit different, but where he called her a stupid bitch, I found that very difficult to take tonight, actually. I found it offensive, and I think the person that I am today would say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not accepting that. We can't do it this way.
Mm.
And I think actually, I'd be very interested to know what other people think. I felt it was out of character with the film. Yeah.
She takes a lot from him, doesn't she?
Mm.
I mean, it feels like in that relationship, it feels like he talks and talks and talks.
Mm.
I mean, she talks a fair bit as well, but I really felt there was a kind of a real imbalance in the relationship.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. So certainly towards in that, especially in that sequence, straight after he calls her a bitch, and then he talks. Well, he monologues for a long, long time. Yeah.
But dare I say that I think that I've always felt very close to Ron. He was a very special person for me, and we did have. It was a really wonderful relationship, which was not sexual, and a lot of people don't understand that is possible between gay men and women, or gay women. You know, you can have a very dear friend, and it is an important relationship. I also noticed that you said about the alienation and people having difficulty expressing their feelings. And I was quite saddened to hear your assessment that you think things are worse.
It was hard for me to compare.
Yeah, because I actually feel that things have certainly moved on quite a lot, whether it's because I have moved on,
Mm.
but the young people today are completely different to the young people when we were making that film,
Mm.
Mm.
and would be much more likely to talk about their feelings.
Right.
And I see gay people as being more accepted and freer to make more permanent relationships.
Mm.
But I mean, I might not have the right picture here.
We all know
Maybe
different
it's
people,
not
I guess.
So,
Yeah.
you know, maybe it's not so, but it does seem. I mean, I can remember the village that I grew up in. There were three guys who were, and I was only quite a small girl at the time. 3 men, and I realised afterwards, and my brother talked to me about it, they were homosexual, these 3 guys. And some blokes just decided they went round and half murdered them. You know, and it was the terrible stigma and the way people used to be entrapped in public toilets, and
Mm.
you'd see it in the newspapers. So, you know, I mean, I have a feeling that for me now, I say that life is all about change, and it's not about better or worse, it's different. And it certainly is different today.
I guess for me, the film seems to really capture this phenomenon of what it means to be transformed into a commodity. You know, that kind of being part of the society as a spectacle, and one's humanity being just something you can trade. And it feels to me like we've gone further and further down that road of the commodification of our personalities, our bodies, etc. I feel like it captures that. I think that's kind of the specific point about alienation I guess I'd make. I mean, staying on that question. I mean, actually, I'll stop talking in a second actually and throw it open. But just perhaps this last question about politics or Nighthawks as a political film. Is it for you a political film or a politicized film? And if so, how would you characterize that politicization? I mean, for those of you who haven't seen the accompanying film, Nighthawks to Strip Jack Naked, Ron, you talk about this character, Hallam, who was a very important character, which ended up getting cut. Perhaps you could just say more about that.
Well, I mean, I remember a expression used at the time was this: the personal was political, and I think that a lot of gay groups in particular kind of took a lead in saying, well, politics isn't just about joining a party and maintaining the same kind of sexual relations which were much more rigid then, as Rachel was saying. But it was a sort of revolution, as it were, that began with you. It began with how you behaved with other people, how you built your relationships, and a sequence that was cut from the film, not censored, I should say. It was a cut because we felt film didn't work with a lot of things in it, but also because it was getting too long. But it was a sequence in a gay commune, and one of the characters, Jim, the teacher, meets, came from this commune, which was part fictional, part real. And in the Stripjack Naked film, which was a kind of reflection on Nighthawks 12 years later, there's about 30 minutes of material not in the Nighthawks film, which includes a big chunk of that part and this particular character who was playing very close to home. And, you know, he lived his revolution. And it was part of this split at the time between people who felt you know, because everyone was trying to change, again, Rachel's word, was trying to change, but there was, you know, do you change using the political systems and parties and join the Labour Party or whatever it was, or join the International Marxist Group, or do you join GLF and turn everything upside down and outrage and shock if necessary, but make your presence kind of felt? I mean, that was a big divide at the time.
Yeah, I think when we tried to, there was a 3-year, 4-year discussion going on with all the people involved. So in a sense, I think a lot of the politics were not toned down. They were just sort of embedded into the film without, because some of the stuff we cut out was simply bad. It was too explicitly stating problems, and there's still some of that stuff in it that I kind of wince at. But I think it was really a political film, and that's why the arguments around it got so ferocious. The response to the film was really divided, and it was like everything that people have been thinking about and forming their views on, this became a tool for them to argue it out. So it's actually quite exciting, sometimes a bit scary at some of the screenings, the early screenings of it. So yeah, I think it's pretty overtly political even now.
And that, just to add, just as a rider to that, I think that you know, the aesthetics of the film were antagonising to quite a few people, because it was not being shot in the conventional way. It was not cutting in the conventional way. Shots were going on longer than they would normally go, and some people didn't want this or like this or want to think why it might be slightly different. So for me, the political levels of the film are on that plane as well, if not most importantly on that plane.
Yeah, quite a lot of people walked out at the length of the eye shot, which is absolutely deliberately what it is.
It's amazing. Yeah,
and that's when you suddenly realise that the aesthetics of the film were upsetting people.
Sure.
And a lot of people just couldn't take it.
You mentioned one of Chantal Akerman as an influence, Jeanne Dielman.
Definitely, yeah.
I imagine that possibly in Britain, for a British audience, that kind of longueur.
I'm sure
is not
that is the main reason we've not been able to have the film repeated, shown again on British TV. It's not the subject matter now. I think it is how it's shot.
Right.
And but then there is, you know, in British TV now, there really is almost no slot anywhere for more independently produced work. So there's a whole generation of work that is unknown, unseen, that needs to be re-looked at. And because Britain never really had an art cinema, that, you know, it came through as independent cinema on tiny budgets. I mean, Nighthawks cost about £60,000, and I remember Richard, our editor, saying that was the cost of a 2-minute martini commercial.
Wow.
Which was made at the same time. So, it was tiny. But somehow we did get it done.
Thank goodness.
Mm.
Shall I throw us open to the floor?
Thank you first of all for coming here. I'm struggling with Jim for the time being, if I'm honest. The more I think about it, I really don't like him as a character. I'm not quite sure if that's a good or bad thing, actually, in so many ways. The question I have is, you mentioned about alienation at the beginning, and you could argue that what I see for him is that he lacks a desire to love, and he almost lacks the desire to create a closer connection with anybody, even though officially on the surface it looks like he struggles to have one. But do you think maybe there is a connection from the fact that if you live a life that is in a way taboo and you're not happy to express that life within a more family circle, whether that has any influence to the way you actually develop the potentiality to love? I'm not quite sure emotionally. What did you try to do with that character?
I always felt that, on the, or something I think about generally with a film, I'm working on a film script, for example, is, do we always believe what the character says? And when he, on the motorway drive with Judy, is saying, I just like going out on my own and meeting these different people and ending up in different places, do we believe him? I mean, there are other aspects in the film that contradict that. That's what I wanted to, that's what I feel. I think a great deal of the film contradicts a great deal of what he says. And I think that's how life is. I mean, so I'm glad we've got that. But I think he's a character. I mean, my sense is, I'm not sure quite what that character is looking for. And whether he would know it if he found it. I have the sense he's looking for some greater element of security, which would contradict what he says when he's on the motorway about liking the adventurism of it all. But I think he, if the character was here being interviewed, I think, the fictional character, he'd say, I'm happy, I'm not unhappy. I think that's what he would say. Whether we would believe him is something else.
That's interesting, actually, that you remember it that way, because I remember it very much that he would like to have a significant other. And in his talks with Judy, that's what he talked about, but of course we didn't see a lot of that. But yeah, that's definitely what I think, that she was like the person who was trying to get out of a relationship.
Yeah.
And he was trying to get into one.
Yes, there was that. Yeah, definitely.
I think politics aside, that film was very up to date. Forget the dance and the music. Majority of my friends live, I don't mean go out every night, but I mean that could have been last night,
Really?
The cruise and I don't know many gay people who want or live a particular family life. I think it's very, that's. I was born in the same year. And in fact, I was the guy outside I was talking to saying that I wasn't born. And it's as if I was. I don't think we've gone any further. Forget politics. I mean, civil partnerships and marriage. I don't mean that. I mean socially and how we interact with people. That's very much. I found that sort of on the money as such.
Interesting.
I feel, just in response, I feel like one thing from a modern eye that felt glaring to me was a bit of the homogeneity of the crowd.
Yes.
I feel that.
I agree.
I feel that today you would see a little bit more of a myriad of gender expressions and different people who have different racial backgrounds and stuff like that.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, that popped out to me.
That I think the kind of racial balance, as it were, was not any. I think that was fairly accurate at the time. I know there were some specific, as I said, there weren't many clubs or places to go at all. And there were one or two, I remember, kind of noted for meeting Asian people. I remember that. But the other thing, which is what Paul said at the beginning, a lot of people just couldn't be in the film. We had almost to the end, we had a section in the script. You hear reference to a Spanish waiter. Well, we had the whole Spanish thing, the whole Spanish community, waitering community in the script, and we were ready to do it. And at the last minute, they said, we can't be in the film. We would lose our job. Our family we can't do it. So I think the people you see in the clubs are the people who were generally happy to be seen. And a lot of the people who you would really have seen in the clubs wouldn't have dared, it was too dangerous for them.
And the clubs were, of course, constructed that no way you could go with a 16mm camera and a film crew into an actual gay bar.
No.
So, we had to build the main small bar in the London Film School, and we finally got permission to use what then became Heaven, the room, but it had a one-night-a-week gay night. But the main gay club then, Bangs, the first of the big clubs, was owned by a Methodist ministry organisation. But you simply couldn't go in. I mean, you could not walk into in a place and freely film. So inevitably, a lot of faces and a lot of people. I think that is one of the sort of regrettable things about the film, that it couldn't quite catch the mix of faces and races and stuff. But they were predominantly white bars. There was a slightly independent, kind of more mixed gay and straight music scene in different parts of London, which were partly covered in a later film I was involved in, Young Soul Rebels. There were whole other scenes. There was a little kind of gay punk scene kind of around. It was just this impossibility of getting everything in, especially with this rather dour character, the main character. There are just people you just know he wouldn't have actually spent the night with. So, yeah, there are some problems around that character, I think, too.
Good. Corinne, yeah, go on.
That scene towards the end in the classroom where the kids confront him, how did that come about? Was that all improv? Or?
Well, we had to get permission again from parents. Otherwise, the children might have been a bit more of a mixed group as well. We had to get permission from all parents of the children for them to be in the film and let them know what the film was. So they were all supportive parents. We kind of didn't have to do much work with that scene.
No,
well, I took some little bits of paper with like the odd question on that they might wish to use if they wanted to say something. But it completely took on a life of its own. And they start arguing with each other. And so it is an improvisation, I think, because there's certainly a few things that were a little bit planted, but the rest just took on a complete life of its own and was pretty much unrepeatable. You couldn't have done a second take. It just happened. Was fantastic that they started just really shouting at each other about things. But the idea for the scene was always part of the script.
It was based on an actual situation that had happened with a teacher, in fact was a geography teacher. And a lot of the questions the kids asked, we did plant, and they were the questions this particular teacher had been asked. And he was fired and never returned to teaching. I think he ended up on an oil rig, working on an oil rig.
What about the insults?
I think certainly, yeah, as I recall, the insults were insults he was getting. And then working with the kids, they were using, like all the people in the film, they were using their own language within a framework that we had worked out with them. I mean, I do remember Paul and I, we had worked on some of the more ordinary classroom scenes in the morning, as I recall. And then we had lunch together with the kids, and we were going around talking to all the kids, getting them ready for that that scene. So it was, we had a framework that had come partly from that account of an actual situation, and then we had fictionalized it, and then we were trying to work out with the kids who would ask what kind of thing, but it did take on a life of its own ultimately, I think. Yeah.
We're going to have to wrap up pretty soon, but maybe one more question, if there are any. If not, I've got...
Actually, I had one question. First of all, I really adored the film. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I remember those times myself. So I felt you really caught the gist of it.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. I wondered what you meant when you reversed the roles. Because the main character, we have someone who separated sexuality from intimacy, but was still looking for it. And he was trying to reach to it by establishing further contact, non-sexual, such as going to dinner or to a film or something. But when he was offered the same thing by this other man, he rebuffed him in no uncertain terms. It must have meant something with that.
Well, it was that notion of, not being quite in sync. It's rather like, the investors having that feeling at the end, which we were parodying a little bit, but they really did want the feeling that the film to end upbeat with a real hope of a relationship working. And
But the relationship had to involve going to the opera. It was
a middle class. And we wanted, I think what we worked from, because we knew at the beginning of the shooting who was going to play all of the characters. We asked ourselves, well, from what we know about the Jim character and what we know about this, what's the character's name in the film? Robert Merrick? John. John's character. Would we really see that relationship working from what we know? And we felt, well, we don't want to end the film kind of destroying it and just sending him back on his own, but let's just have a doubt. In fact,
it wasn't meant to rule it out.
No, I mean, because actually they go off together. Yeah. It was this. I always sort of almost have this subtitle in my head of when they're driving just before the club and they're going home, and one of them says, should we go to your place or mine? And he says, no, I want to go out, but it's 1 o'clock. I've got to be up at 8 in the morning. It was like their first row, so they are already there is some coupling there, and they're allowed to express some difference of opinion, and they do go, and clearly the John character doesn't really want to go at all, but they do go off together, and then we tried this idea that once they left, another person took their place, and that the film could have been about any one of these people, not just the person we took one, but it could have been any of them. And just to say again, if anyone is interested, the BFI gave me some of their DVDs to sell, but it does include Nighthawks, and the Strip Jack Naked is 90 minutes account of the film, and then there are films by Paul and I individually. There's a film on Edward Hopper, a 50-minute film. There's a lot on it, if anyone's interested.
Get it. It's worth it. If you have any more burning questions, I suggest you try and corner Paul or Ron afterwards. But can I just thank
thanks for coming.
Ron Peck and Paul Hallam once again. It was just a lovely
Thank you.
Thank you.